You are listening to Catholic Family Podcast.
Young Man's Guide, The Lance to the Fear of God. 27. Christian Courage. The more deeply your heart, dear reader, is imbued with the true fear of God, so much the more will this fear rule and guide you in every circumstance of life, and so much the less will you know any other fear, and so much the more courageously will you at all times and in all places range yourself on the side of God before the eyes of the world. And in your own day, it is more than ever necessary to stand up courageously for the cause of Christ. All Christians, but in the first place all men, both old and young, must show themselves to be the courageous apostles of Christ, must fearlessly espouse his cause before all the world, and in every position of life. That is a high, a glorious vocation calculated to fire every youthful heart with enthusiasm. Christ has said, "Everyone that shall confess me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven." Matthew 10:32. This open confession of faith in Jesus Christ and the truths he has revealed, this fearless espousal of his cause, is demanded especially in our times. Modern society is to a great extent anti-Christian, or inimical to Christ, pervaded by hatred to Christianity in general, and to the Catholic Church in particular. This was very plainly shown some years ago, when the question of Christian education was debated in the German Parliament. On that occasion, Count Caprivi, the Imperial Chancellor, publicly asserted that the whole question entered on this: Christ or Antichrist. After this courageous declaration, a tremendous hubbub arose, in which all present joined, with the exception of the Centre and some members of other parties. The whole of the press, which is hostile to the Church, took up the question later on, and did its best to fan the flame of irritation. The anti-Christian spirit is still more rampant and obnoxious at the present time in France. There a godless government is making every effort to destroy the Church, to subvert the kingdom of Christ. Faith in the divinity of Christ is also assailed in the United States and other countries by tongue and pen, and from many a pulpit and platform. The contemptuous cry of the Jews on Good Friday, "We will not have this man to reign over us," is today the battle cry of his enemies. Therefore is Christianity to be expelled from the school, from the family, from the legislator. And for the self-same reason, the daily press becomes ever more and more unchristian. Ever more shamelessly and impudently are immoral novels disseminated, a truly scandalous kind of literature. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance that the generation of Catholics who are now growing up, I mean Catholic young men, should fearlessly and courageously come forward and espouse the cause of Christ. Even the dread of death ought to induce no one to hold back, much less the dread of temporal loss. God will know how to protect his own in case of need. Think of what the faithful adherents of our holy religion have endured since the so-called Reformation in England and Ireland. Remember that millions of the early Christians shed their blood for Christ amid the most cruel tortures. Those who confess themselves to be adherents of the Christian religion were robbed and deprived by the state of their private property. Yet the Christians bore all this for quite 3 centuries. Sacrifices like these are not required of us. We are not threatened with similar penalties. We ought therefore to find it easier to take the side of Christ, and to fight for his cause more cheerfully. Moreover, when you are of an age to take part in election and voting, you ought not to be false to your character as a Christian. You ought to have the courage of your convictions, and act in accordance with your religious principles, even if you thereby antagonize or displease the one who gives you employment. It becomes ever more important, also, to support with might and main the Catholic press in the fight for Christ. Young men can do much in this respect. They can unite their efforts in this cause, in behalf of which they ought to consider no expenditure of time or money too great. We must give ourselves no rest until there is in every Catholic household at least one newspaper or periodical which, if need be, will courageously fight for the sake of Christ and fearlessly defend the interests of the Church. In this manner must we all, and young men more especially, use every possible exertion in order that, in the days in which we live, Christ may once more reign in the whole of our public life. Let us labor and struggle courageously for the spread of Christ's kingdom on earth. You will hear the enemies of Christ and of the Church assert that this is priestcraft. Bear in mind, however, that the Church only commands in the name of Christ. The commands of the Church simply express the will of God. What the sun, shining in the vault of heaven, is for the life of the body, Christianity is for the life of the soul. Christ is the Sun of truth and justice for the whole human race. This sun must influence the whole life of man. Therefore, Christians, to the war. Fight for God and the right. Fight for the interests of Christ and his Church. It is a question of the weal or woe of mankind. Vow fidelity to Christ in the following words. My God, though all unfaithful be, I never will depart from thee. All for Christ shall be my cry, while life on earth goes swiftly by.